The auction master lifted his gavel, ready to strike, and Eleanor Hayes knew she was about to lose her children one by one. 30 seconds. That was all the law was giving her. 30 seconds to become someone's wife or watch officials split her family across the frontier like firewood. 7 small hands clung to her coat as the January wind screamed across Covenant Creek, Wyoming territory. The crowd stared at her like she was a bad deal they did not want. The 47th man had already walked away. They had said the words out loud like they were nothing. Fat, undesirable, burden. Eleanor did not cry. She had learned that tears could not feed a child. She stood straight anyway, even when her knees shook, even when her fingers went numb inside her worn gloves. Her good wool coat had been mended 3 times, but it still looked plain. Nothing about her looked like hope to these men. Her oldest, Sarah, 13 and 2, grown in the eyes, pressed close at her side. Thomas, 11, tried to stand like a man, but his jaw trembled. James and William stayed quiet, watching the crowd the way hunted animals watched wolves. Margaret and Catherine held each other's hands. Little Edward, only 3, hid behind Eleanor's skirt and peeked out with wide eyes. Lot 17, the auction master called, his voice bored like he was counting sacks of grain. Eleanor Hayes, widow, age 32, 7 children, ages 3 to 13. A few men laughed, others shifted, thinking, not about her heart, not about her courage, about cost, about mouths to feed, about work. Opening bid, $75, the auction master said. Includes transport and settlement fees. And the children. Silence. The kind that makes the world feel cruel. Eleanor had known it might happen. She had known it when she signed papers back in Philadelphia. She had known it when she sold the last of her furniture and watched her children eat the last warm meal they would have in that cramped city room. Debt collectors did not care if your children were hungry. Factory bosses did not care if you worked until your bones ached. The West had sounded like desperate hope, and desperate hope was still better than watching your babies starve. 70. The auction master tried again. A man in a beaver hat spat into the mud. Too fat, he said, like he was talking about a broken wagon wheel. And 7 brats. Might as well buy a plague. Sarah's hand slipped into Eleanor's. Cold. Small. Eleanor squeezed back, steady and sure, because her children needed something steady. $50, the auction master said, and now his voice carried a sharp edge. Last call. Behind the platform, 2 officials waited with papers. Eleanor recognized the thin woman with a tight mouth, Mrs. Cromwell from the Bride Society office. The papers in her hands were the backup plan, orphanage commitments, work farm contracts, a legal knife, ready to cut her family into pieces. The auction master lifted his gavel higher. If no bid is received, he announced, the children will be remanded to territorial custody under the Orphan Placement Act. Edward made a small sound. Mama? Eleanor bent down, even though her knees protested in the cold. She touched his cheek, red from wind and fear. Hush, love. Be brave just a little longer. She stood again and looked at the crowd. Most men looked away. A few stared back with hard eyes, measuring how much they could take from her. None of them saw the woman who had kept 7 children alive through a Philadelphia winter on pennies and grit. None of them saw the mother who could stitch wounds, balance a ledger, read a book, stretch food, and keep peace in a room full of hungry mouths. They only saw her size and her burden. Going once, the auction master said. Eleanor's heart hammered so hard she could hear it in her ears. Going twice. Sarah's silent tears tracked down her face. Thomas clenched his fists. The younger children huddled together, like they could disappear inside each other. Gone. A voice cut through the air from the back of the crowd, deep and rough as a rock slide. I'll take her. Every head turned. The man who stepped forward did not look like he belonged in town. He looked like he belonged to the mountains themselves. He was tall and broad, dressed in buckskin and fur, his boots leaving deep prints in half-frozen mud. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, shot through with gray. His face was hard, sharp cheekbones and a jaw like stone, with eyes the pale color of winter ice. The crowd parted for him the way water parts for a rock. The auction master blinked like he could not believe what he was hearing. "You said you'll take her? You know she has 7 children." The man did not even flinch. "All 7. A murmur rippled through the crowd, not kindness but shock. Men leaned to whisper. Someone said his name like a warning. "Caleb Roar," one voice breathed. Eleanor's stomach tightened. She had heard that name in town talk before she ever set foot on the platform. The mountain man, the one who barely came down. The one people said had blood on his hands from the war, the one they said was dangerous because he kept to himself. Caleb stepped closer. His eyes swept over Eleanor's children, not unkind, but sharp, like he was assessing what was in front of him. Then his gaze landed on Eleanor. She forced herself to meet it. She would not look away. If this was the last gamble of her life, she would face it with her head up. "How much?" he asked. The auction master swallowed. "The current offer is 50. Caleb's mouth tightened. 300. The crowd made a sound like a gasp swallowed into a cough. Mrs. Cromwell's head snapped up. Even she looked shaken. The auction master stuttered. "That more than covers it." "That covers her passage, settlement fees, provisions, everything." Caleb nodded once. "Good. Then let's stop wasting time." The gavel came down, not like a strike of doom, but like a door closing on one life and opening into another. Eleanor felt dizzy, not from relief alone, but from fear that came right behind it. A man did not pay $300 for nothing. A man did not take 7 children unless he had a reason. Caleb turned to her, voice low and plain. "Mrs. Hayes, you understand what this is?" Quote. Eleanor swallowed. Her throat was dry as dust. "A marriage contract, shelter and food for work. A roof for my children." Caleb's eyes did not soften, but something in them steadied. "That's right. I've got a homestead in the high country. 2-day ride. Rough travel. Winters last long and mean. Work is hard. I need someone who can keep a house, manage supplies, and help me run the place. Your kids will be fed and clothed, but they'll work too. Everyone earns their keep. I'm not selling dreams. I'm offering survival." He paused, letting it sit heavy. "You want it or not?" Eleanor looked at her children. 7 faces, 7 lives depending on her next word. She glanced once at the officials and their papers. Then she looked back at Caleb Roar, the man the town had forgotten, the man who had just said her name like she mattered. "I want it," she said clearly. "I accept." Caleb nodded, sharp and final. "Then we go now. We're burning daylight." The paperwork took minutes. Eleanor's hand shook as she wrote her name. She realized with a strange jolt that she might never sign Eleanor Hayes again. After today, she would carry a stranger's name, and her children would live under his roof, far from any help. As Caleb counted out gold coins, Mrs. Cromwell pulled Eleanor aside. Her voice was low, urgent. "Do you know anything about him?" "No," Eleanor said honestly. Mrs. Cromwell's eyes flicked toward Caleb. "There are stories. That he killed men. That he came west to escape justice." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "There are stories about me, too. That I'm lazy because I'm fat. That I'm worth less than $50. I've learned stories can be crueler than truth." Mrs. Cromwell looked troubled. "Just be careful." Eleanor nodded. "I will." Within the hour they were leaving Covenant Creek. Caleb had a sturdy wagon packed with supplies. He lifted the smaller children up like they weighed nothing, then offered Eleanor his hand. His palm was calloused and warm. She took it because she had no other path left. The town fell behind them. Eleanor did not look back. The land opened wide, wild and silent, sage and tough grass, dark stands of pine, mountains rising like teeth against the cold sky. Eleanor's children huddled under blankets in the wagon bed, whispering in tight voices. Sarah sat alert, watching Caleb like she was trying to solve a puzzle. For a long time, Caleb did not speak. The wagon creaked. The horses' hooves beat a steady rhythm. Eleanor's mind raced through every warning she had ever heard. Then, Caleb spoke without looking at her. "You warm enough?" "Yes," Eleanor said. "The children, too." He nodded once. "Blankets in the back if you need more." It was not softness, but it was care, and Eleanor felt something inside her loosen just a little. As afternoon sank toward evening, the trail began to climb. The air sharpened. The mountains drew closer. Eleanor watched Caleb's hands on the reins. Steady, sure, scarred. She finally found her voice. "Mr. Roar, why did you do it?" Quote. Caleb kept his eyes on the trail. "Because I needed help. And I don't leave children to be torn apart by paper men." Eleanor's chest tightened. "You knew they would laugh. You knew what they would say." "I don't care what they say," he answered. "I care what I can build." The words sat heavy between them. By dusk, they were deep in the foothills, and the wind smelled like snow. Eleanor held her children close, staring into the rising dark, and wondered what kind of man bought a family no one wanted, and why the town seemed afraid of him. Because somewhere ahead, beyond the trees and the cold, was his homestead. And Eleanor had a feeling that what waited there was not just hard work and winter storms. It was the truth about Caleb Roar. The storm came down from the mountains before sunrise on their second day of travel, thick and sudden, like the sky had decided to bury the world. Snow swirled so fast Eleanor could barely see past the horses' ears. The wagon lurched, the wheels sticking in deepening drifts, and the children clung to each other under the blankets. Caleb Roar drove as if the storm were nothing more than a stubborn wind. His jaw was locked, his eyes narrow beneath his hat brim, reading the land the way Eleanor used to read factory ledgers. Calm, sharp, certain. But even he could not ignore the growing danger. "We need shelter," he said finally, raising his voice above the wind. "There's an old trapper's cabin close. If we don't make it there, this storm will freeze us before nightfall." Eleanor tightened her grip on little Edward. Her fingers were numb, but fear made her hold stronger. "How far?" "Half a mile," Caleb said. "Maybe less." Hard to tell with the snow. Half a mile felt like 50 in weather like this. The wagon groaned, the horses snorted and shook their heads, and the wind screamed as if trying to tear them off the mountain. Eleanor tucked the blankets tighter around Margaret and Catherine and whispered steady words she didn't believe. "It's all right. We'll be all right. Mama's here." Caleb leaned forward on the bench, guiding the horses through a narrow curve. The world seemed to tilt, the wagon sliding sideways on a patch of ice. The children gasped. Eleanor grabbed the seat to stay upright. Caleb snapped the reins lightly, steadying the horses. "Easy now." "Good boys." He never raised his voice at them. That surprised Eleanor. A man who looked so hard being gentle with animals made something warm spark inside her despite the cold. Minutes dragged like hours. Snow piled on the wagon cover, heavy and threatening to collapse. Eleanor shook it off whenever she could reach high enough. Her arms burned. Her breathing hurt. The children shivered under the blankets, their breath small white clouds. Then Caleb pointed through the storm. There. At first, Eleanor saw nothing but white. Then, slowly, a shape came into view. A low log cabin, half buried in snow, leaning slightly but still standing against the wind. Relief hit her so hard she almost wept. Caleb urged the horses forward. "Hold on, the ground's rough here." Quote, the wagon bumped across frozen roots and rocks before stopping beside the cabin. Caleb jumped down at once, his movements quick and sure. He lifted the youngest children first and carried them inside. Eleanor followed, slipping on the slick ground, her hands shaking as she ushered the older ones through the door. Inside, the cabin was dark and cold, but dry. A stone hearth waited against the far wall. Dust thick on the table and floor showed no one had used the place in months. "Stay with the little ones," Caleb told Eleanor. "I'll get wood." Before she could answer, he disappeared into the storm again. Thomas, brave but shaken, hovered near the door. "Mama, is he coming back?" "Yes," Eleanor said. "He won't leave us." She hoped she was right. Sarah moved to the fireplace. "Mama, I can help you start a fire." "Good girl," Eleanor whispered. By the time Caleb returned with an armful of wood, they had the hearth cleared. He dropped the logs, shoved kindling under them, and struck his flint. The flames caught slow at first, then brighter, pushing back the cold. Heat spread through the room, thin but life-saving. Caleb stomped snow from his boots and looked around. His face was half-shadowed by firelight, making him look like a man carved from earth and storm. "We'll stay here tonight," he said. "Maybe tomorrow, too, if the storm doesn't break." Eleanor nodded. "Do the horses have shelter?" "There's a lean-to behind the cabin. It'll hold them." His voice softened just a little. "They're tough, used to the cold." The children huddled close to the fire. Edward crawled into Eleanor's lap, his small body trembling. She wrapped her arms around him, letting the heat from the flames ease his shaking. Caleb brought blankets from the wagon and laid them around the hearth. "You and the children sleep near the fire. I'll keep watch." Eleanor frowned. "You need rest, too." "I don't need much. Been living out here a long time." He met her eyes. "Storm like this brings trouble. Animals. Sometimes men. Someone has to stay awake." Eleanor wanted to argue, but didn't. She could see that stubborn line in his jaw. He had already decided. As the fire grew warmer, the children slowly relaxed. Sarah read softly from Caleb's old book, Robinson Crusoe, her voice soft and steady. The younger ones fell asleep, leaning against each other. Thomas and James tried to stay awake, but drooped with exhaustion. Eleanor watched them all, counting their breaths, touching their hair, their hands, making sure they were still here, still warm. Her heart loosened in ways it hadn't in months. Caleb sat by the door, his rifle across his knee. The firelight flickered on his face, throwing sharp shadows across the strong lines of his jaw. "You saved us today," Eleanor said quietly once the children were sleeping. He shook his head. "Just did what needed doing." "Still," she said, "thank you." Caleb didn't look at her right away. He seemed uncomfortable with gratitude, like it didn't fit right on him. Finally, he nodded once. "You did your part," he said. "Kept the little ones calm. Held the blankets tight. People break in storms like this. You didn't." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from the fire. "I couldn't break," she said. "Not with 7 children depending on me." Caleb studied her then, fully, without rushing. His eyes were hard to read. Not cold, not warm, something steady. "You're stronger than you think," he said. No one had ever said that to her before. Not once. Her former neighbors had called her soft. Factory workers had called her slow. Even family back east had whispered she'd married above herself. But Caleb Rohr, mountain man, stranger, danger in the eyes of town gossip, saw something different. It unsettled her and steadied her at the same time. The storm had not weakened by morning. If anything, it seemed angrier. Snow piled against the cabin door, nearly blocking it. The wind howled like a living thing. Caleb had kept the fire going all night. Eleanor knew because she had woken several times and seen him moving, silent and strong, heading wood, checking the windows, listening. Now, as dawn showed faint behind the clouds, he handed her a tin cup of hot coffee. She blinked at it. "You didn't need to." "You'll need the strength today," he said simply. "Storm's still bad. Cabin might hold, but we need to dig out, or we'll be trapped." Eleanor wrapped her cold fingers around the cup. The heat seeped into her bones. "Thank you." The children stirred slowly, their faces soft in sleep. Sarah sat up first, rubbing her eyes and brushing hair from her face. "Is it morning?" "Sort of," Eleanor said. "The storm is still strong." Sarah moved to check on her siblings with the same protectiveness Eleanor felt. She really was too young to carry so much worry. Caleb stood and checked his rifle. "I'm going out to shovel the roof." If too much snow piles on top, it'll cave. Thomas sat up straight. I can help. Caleb studied him. Your hands steady? Thomas nodded quickly. Your legs strong? Another nod. Caleb gave a short, approving grunt. All right, but you do exactly what I say. No wandering. No trying to prove anything. Thomas swallowed. Yes, sir. Eleanor hesitated. Is it safe? No, Caleb said honestly, but it's necessary. Outside, the storm slashed at them like sharp claws. Snow clung to Caleb's hair and beard instantly. He moved with confidence, using a shovel to clear the doorway and make a path to the roof. Thomas followed, working hard but clumsy in the deep drifts. Eleanor watched through a small window, her stomach twisting until she saw Caleb tap the boy's shoulder and show him how to angle the shovel to lift rather than push. Patient, calm, teaching, not scolding. She hadn't expected that. Inside, she fed the younger children, warmed more coffee, and tried not to imagine the worst. After nearly an hour, the door opened and the wind shoved Caleb and Thomas back inside. Both were covered in snow. Thomas's cheeks were red, but his eyes bright with pride. You did well, Caleb said as he hung his coat by the fire. You listen. Good. Thomas tried to hide his smile and failed. Eleanor felt something shift again. Trust, maybe. Or the beginning of it. The storm finally eased that afternoon, the world turning quiet and white. Caleb fed the horses and checked the wagon. Eleanor dried wet clothes by the fire. The children gathered close, playing quiet games to keep warm. By evening, the cabin felt less like a desperate refuge and more like a strange kind of home. Just for now, just until the storm broke. That night, after the children slept, Eleanor sat near the fire with her sewing kit, mending a tear in Sarah's skirt. Caleb was beside the door again, sharpening a knife, his movements slow and sure. Why did you come down to Covenant Creek this week? Eleanor asked. People said you barely come to town. Caleb paused, running the blade against the stone. Needed supplies. That all? He hesitated. Then he said, Wanted company. Eleanor looked up. Caleb didn't meet her eyes. Been 10 years since I lived with anyone. Place gets quiet. Too quiet. She waited, sensing more. They said in town there'd be a bride auction, he said. Didn't plan to buy anyone. Just wanted to see. To see what? Whether any woman could live my kind of life, he said. And could they? She asked softly. Caleb looked at her now, his eyes clear and direct. Only one could. They sat in silence then, fire crackling between them. Eleanor's heart beat too fast, but she didn't look away. She didn't want to. By dawn the next day, the storm had fully passed. A pale sun rose over the mountains, turning the snow silver. Caleb hitched the horses, and they prepared to leave. The children helped as best they could. Thomas held the reins while Caleb checked the harness. Sarah folded the blankets neatly, her serious eyes watching everything. The younger ones stayed close to Eleanor, their cheeks pink in the cold. Will your homestead look like this? Margaret asked, pointing at the glittering snow. No, Eleanor said with a small smile. I think it will be even prettier. Caleb came around the wagon with a crate in his arms. Ready? Eleanor nodded and lifted Edward into the wagon. She climbed up after him, adjusting the blankets, and the older children settled beside her. Caleb took the driver's seat, clicked his tongue, and the horses pulled forward. They had traveled only an hour when Caleb lifted one hand sharply. Quiet. Eleanor froze. Her children did too. Caleb's eyes narrowed at the trail behind them. Someone's following. Her blood went cold. Who? 3 riders, Caleb said, coming fast. Fear punched through Eleanor's chest. Her hands grabbed for her children without thinking. Are they dangerous? Caleb didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened. Most men riding fast in the mountains aren't coming for a friendly visit. He urged the horses into a steady trot, his posture alert. Eleanor could hear her heart pounding, the wagon wheels crunching the snow, the children's small breaths. And then she saw them, 3 dark shapes emerging through the trees. Getting closer. Caleb set his jaw. Stay calm. Whatever happens, Keep the children behind you." Eleanor nodded, even though her whole body felt like breaking. Then a voice rang out from the snow-covered trail behind them. "Roar! Hold up!" Caleb muttered under his breath. Crowley. Eleanor's heart dropped like a stone. The name felt like a curse. "Who is he?" she whispered. "A man who doesn't take no for an answer," Caleb said. "And a man who wants what I have." "What you have?" Eleanor asked. But Caleb's answer was drowned out by the thunder of hooves as the riders cut in front of the wagon, forcing them to stop. The scarred man at the lead smirked at her, at Caleb. "Well now," he drawled, "looks like you've picked up cargo." Eleanor felt the meaning behind that word. It made her sick. She pulled her children close. Caleb reached slowly for his rifle, and Crowley smiled wider. The mountains held their breath. Danger hovered like a shadow, and Eleanor Hayes, fat, unwanted, forgotten, felt something wake inside her, something fierce, something that would not let anyone take her family again. Not ever. Crowley rode closer, his horse snorting steam into the cold air. Snow crunched under its hooves as he brought it almost nose to nose with Caleb's led horse. The man's grin widened when he saw Eleanor and the children huddled in the wagon. His eyes slid over them like he was appraising livestock. "Well, well," Crowley said. "Heard you bought yourself a ready-made family, Roar. 7 kids. Quite the haul." Eleanor felt the children press into her. She wrapped her arms around Edward and Catherine, praying they could not see her fear. Caleb kept his rifle across his lap. "State your business, Crowley." Crowley tipped his hat back, revealing a long scar that cut across his cheek. "My business is simple. You got something I want." Caleb's voice dropped low. "I don't have anything of yours." "Oh, but you do," Crowley winked at Eleanor. "Word in town is you snapped up a bride who wasn't even yours to take." The society was fixing to place her and those brats somewhere else. A man with money might have wanted a chance. Eleanor's stomach twisted. Crowley wasn't here for revenge. He was here for ownership. He wanted them. Caleb's jaw tightened. "You're too late." Crowley leaned forward in his saddle. "I think I'm right on time." He pointed at Eleanor with a gloved hand. "A woman like her would last longer with me. I know how to work a wife. And the kids? I can find use for them too." Eleanor gasped softly. Sarah grabbed her hand. Thomas looked ready to leap from the wagon, fists clenched. Caleb's voice turned to steel. "Back away!" Crowley laughed. "Always thought you were too soft, Roar. Living up in the mountains, pretending you ain't like the rest of us. But you can't hide from the world forever." 2 of Crowley's men moved their horses to flank the wagon. Caleb shifted in his seat, keeping the rifle level. "You have one chance to ride away," Caleb said. Crowley smirked. "Or what? You'll shoot me in front of the lady? In front of all her children?" He clicked his tongue. "That don't seem very husband-like." Eleanor suddenly understood something Caleb had not said aloud. Crowley wasn't just a bully. He was dangerous. And Caleb Roar feared what he might do. Eleanor swallowed hard. Her voice trembled, but she forced the words out. "We don't belong to you." Crowley's smile sharpened. "Sweetheart, everything out here belongs to whoever's strong enough to take it." Caleb lifted his rifle an inch higher. Last warning. Crowley's eyes narrowed. The amusement faded. "Fine, then." He reached for his pistol. It happened fast. Caleb fired first. Crowley's hat flew off as the bullet cut the strap near his ear, sending him stumbling back in the saddle. His men jerked their reins, startled. Horses reared. Snow sprayed into the air. Crowley roared, "You son of a—" Before he could finish, Caleb had jumped off the wagon, boots sinking deep into snow. "Stay inside," he barked at Eleanor. He rushed toward Crowley, grabbing the man's coat before the outlaw could fully draw. The 2 men crashed into the snow, grappling, punching, rolling down a small embankment. "Mama!" Sarah cried. Eleanor pulled her back. "Stay down!" Thomas tried to climb over the wagon side. Eleanor yanked him back. "No!" "But he's alone!" Thomas shouted. "He's not alone," Eleanor said. "He's ours." On the slope, Caleb fought with a quiet, deadly focus. Crowley swung wild, cursing, fury twisting his face. Caleb blocked a blow, landed another, then another. Snow mixed with drops of blood. Their breaths rose like steam in the freezing air. Crowley clawed at his belt knife. Caleb seized his wrist, twisting so hard the knife fell into the snow. But Crowley was vicious and desperate. He reached for Caleb's throat. Eleanor didn't think. She acted. She grabbed the nearest thing she could, Caleb's spare rifle from the wagon bed. She jumped down into the snow, her boots slipping, heart hammering. Sarah shouted after her. Thomas gasped. Eleanor didn't stop. She plunged through deep drifts until she stood above the fighting men. Crowley had Caleb pinned now, one knee on his chest, both hands closing around his throat. Caleb's face reddened. His breaths came short. Snow kicked up around them as he struggled. Crowley laughed, breathless and wild. "Should have let me take her, Roar. You ain't built for this." Eleanor raised the rifle. Her arms shook, not from the weight, but from fear. Crowley didn't see her yet. "Get off him," she said. Crowley froze. His head turned slowly. When he saw her, his smile came back, ugly and confident. "Put that down, woman. You ain't got the nerve." Eleanor's grip tightened. "I'm a mother. I have more nerve than you'll ever understand." Crowley lunged toward her. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She swung the rifle like a hammer. The wooden stock cracked hard against Crowley's temple. The outlaw collapsed into the snow, stunned and groaning. Caleb pushed him off and staggered up, coughing. Eleanor rushed to him, grabbing his arm. He steadied himself, his breath harsh. "You all right?" she asked, voice shaking. Caleb stared at her, not with shock, but with something like awe. "You saved my life," he said quietly. "I protected my family," Eleanor whispered back. Crowley moaned, trying to crawl. Caleb stepped forward and pressed his boot between the man's shoulders, pinning him easily. "Your reign ends here," Caleb said. He signaled Crowley's men with a sharp whistle. "Take him and ride out. If any of you come near my land again, you won't leave breathing." The two riders hesitated only a moment before grabbing their leader and hauling him onto a horse. Crowley swore weakly, clutching his head. Within seconds, they galloped away toward the lower valley. The mountains grew quiet again. Caleb exhaled long, the tension draining from him. He turned to Eleanor slowly. "Thank you," he said. Eleanor tried to steady her breathing. "I only did what anyone would do." "No," Caleb said. "Most wouldn't. Courage like that is rare." He reached out, brushing snow from her sleeve in a gentle motion she didn't expect. His hand lingered just a moment before he pulled back. "We need to move," he said. "They might come back later." They climbed into the wagon. Caleb took the reins, though Eleanor noticed the tremor in his hands. Sarah, Thomas, and the younger children stared at their mother like they were seeing her for the first time. "Mama," Thomas whispered, "you hit him so hard." Eleanor gathered him close, only because he tried to hurt us. Sarah's eyes glimmered with something like pride. "I knew you'd protect us." Eleanor swallowed the lump in her throat. Caleb flicked the reins. "Hold on, we're close now." The climb grew steeper, the forest thicker. Then, as they turned a ridge, the land opened. Caleb's homestead stood in a small valley protected by tall pines and rock walls. A sturdy cabin of hand-hewn logs, a barn, a smokehouse, stacks of firewood, fenced pasture, a workshop with tools neatly hung. It was not just a homestead. It was a life someone had built with patience and sweat. Eleanor felt something warm settle inside her chest. Caleb slowed the horses. "Welcome home." The words felt fragile and enormous at once. Home. Her children looked at the cabin with wide eyes. Sarah squeezed Eleanor's hand. Thomas leaned forward in awe. Even little Edward sat up straighter. Caleb climbed down and offered Eleanor his hand. This time, when she took it, she didn't feel uncertainty. She felt strength. Not his. Theirs. Together. As the children ran to explore the yard, Caleb stood beside Eleanor, his voice low. I meant what I said back in that cabin. I wasn't looking for a wife. I was looking for someone who could live this life with me. He paused. I didn't know I'd find someone stronger than me. Eleanor's breath caught. Caleb? He shook his head gently. We'll build this life slow, steady, no forcing anything. But if you choose it, you and the children will never fear again. Not while I breathe. Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes. This time she didn't hide them. She looked at her children laughing in the snow. She looked at the mountains rising around them like guardians. She looked at Caleb Roar, the man the world feared, but who had shown her more safety than anyone ever had. I choose this, she said. Caleb's eyes softened for the first time since she'd met him. Then he nodded, once like a promise sealed. And in that quiet valley, surrounded by snow and pines and the sound of her children's laughter, Eleanor Hayes, who had been unwanted, underestimated, nearly torn apart by the world, felt her new life begin. A life built with courage. A life built with love, growing slow and honest. A life in the mountains. With a man who had chosen her. And with a family no one would ever break again.